looking out onto my eyelashes in an agony of delightful anticipation.
Listen to them, the children of the night. What music
From the D&E Studios, welcome to the sexiest show on the internet, the Dracula Podcast. I am your host, Lawrence Burgess, or you can call me LB for short. Thank you to Adam Stover, Rob, and Martha of Southgate Media, and most of all, you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. We aim to bring you thoughtful, stimulating media reviewing the films, books, music, plays, and personalities that make Stoker's creation so beloved, the criticism to inform your purchasing decisions, interesting guests, and the needs of our communities. Drop us a line on Facebook, Twitter, Dracula Audio No Spaces, or the Dracula inbox at audio.dracula@gmail.com. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that we are brought to you by the Foxborough in Charleston, West Virginia, the industry leader in post-production, scoring, multi-track audio recording, mixing, mastering, and graphic design. So if you want to contact Greg Hunt, do so at 1007 Bigley Avenue, Suite 319, Charleston, West Virginia, 25302. Folks, welcome. We appreciate you joining in. And if you haven't checked out our archives, please do so at southgatemediagroup.com. There you'll find everything. Lots of great content, criticism, reviews, and we take it all the way with Penny Dreadful. And speaking of Penny Dreadful, wow. Just when you think it can't get any better, folks, it does. You talk about consequences. You talk about a meaningful narrative. You can't beat Penny Dreadful. It is amazing. What it does for television is, I'm not sure. We're living in a time right now when there's lots of good TV, but when you have singularly great writing and singularly great editing and directing with great talent, when Ava Green's not even there, folks, take hold of it. It's a very special time in television. And I'm someone who comes from cinema first, and it's a very cinematic and great experience. And if you love literature, just as we've preached before on this podcast, you can't go wrong. And we're spotlighting communication from the Dracula inbox. Malcolm of Beckley, West Virginia writes, Lawrence, I don't have enough time to watch them all, but I would like to watch some of the Universal monster films. Which ones do you recommend? Well, if you've listened to this podcast before, we of course recommend Dracula 1931, The Invisible Man, The Mummy 1932, and The Raven all get our seals of approval. The Wolfman is very good. There are very few films that we can't go wrong. It just depends on where you want to go. If you want something a little more lighthearted and something that doesn't take itself too seriously, try The Invisible Man and Bride of Frankenstein. If you want some singular horror, stick with things like Dracula and The Raven, and tragic things, of course, you go to Phantom of the Opera and The Wolfman. And thank you for your email, but the best place really to experience it so far is the Universal Monsters Essential Collection on Blu-ray. That, of course, has 9 films, 2 versions of Dracula, the English and the Spanish, Frankenstein 31, The Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolfman, The Invisible Man, Phantom of the Opera, The Mummy, and The Creature from the Black Lagoon. You can't go wrong with it. It's an amazing thing. We've given Universal a lot of grief, and rightfully so, for how they've treated Dracula recently, specifically in the NBC version of Dracula, that nonsense known as Van Helsing and Dracula Untold. However, when it comes to film restoration and doing their classics justice, when it comes on Blu-ray and 1080p, it's a hard thing to beat. Excellent. And once again, folks, thank you for all of your comments and concerns for me. I really appreciate it. It's been very tough the past month or so. Life gets in the way, and sometimes you lose focus. And this podcast is an excellent way to regain focus. And for the comfort and all the kind words, there are really too many to list out. Thank you. We sincerely appreciate it. Just an update about the Christopher Lee tribute. It is coming. And it will come to you right after the second season finale of Penny Dreadful, which is, of course, this Sunday at 10 p.m. on Showtime. It will be a completely separate entity. It'll have nothing to do with Penny Dreadful, but will celebrate the life of Christopher Lee, and we just cover 1%, if that, of his career and the things he's done, and yet it's quite an achievement. If you want to learn about history, about someone who crossed barriers, about someone who transcended not only film but music and media, and someone whose works will last forever, then stick in for the Christopher Lee tribute. It is coming, and it is very, very telling of such a remarkable human being. And don't forget, folks, before we hit into Casting Dread, that we are on part 6 of our 8-part review and analysis of the Universal Monsters franchise. We hit it strong today with 2 excellent films, The Wolfman in 1941 and The Phantom of the Opera remake in 1943. We're not very high on remakes, but Universal did it first, and you may be surprised of what you hear. So stay tuned. Alright, folks, here it is. This is our subcast, entitled Casting Dread, The Penny Dreadful Show. The 9th episode of the 2nd season of Penny Dreadful is entitled, And Hell Itself My Only Foe. It was written by John Logan and directed by Brian Kirk. How does Penny Dreadful keep doing it? How does it continue to top itself all week long? One of the great things about this episode is it concludes the stories of seemingly more than one character. So if you don't want to be spoiled, stop right now, but if you're listening to this podcast, you love it, and you've already seen Penny Dreadful, there's no excuse for it. Starting off, Ethan and Vanessa are still in the Cutwife's cabin. Mr. Roper comes to visit and threatens to kill Vanessa after he rapes her. Vanessa and Ethan kill Mr. Roper together. Victor Frankenstein, of course, knows where Vanessa and Ethan are staying, and he summons them back as Sir Malcolm is gone. It's not over yet with Ethan Chandler. The inspector knows what's going on with Ethan Chandler, and he also knows his real name. We'll get to that in a minute. The inspector seems like he has the upper hand. Interestingly enough, in the Wax Museum, one of the first things we see is a statue of Lucifer with one horn broken. And Caliban also compares Lily to Lucifer, as beauty is seductive and evil is seductive. Beauty, evil, and seduction all in one. We find out that Sembeni was a slave trader, and the marks on his face, he bears them as a sin he has to live with the rest of his life. Interestingly enough, Hecate steps forward, and we know a little bit more of why she's going against Evil and Poole. Hecate knows Ethan's secret as the Lupus Dei and wants him to serve beside Lucifer. She knows he wants to feed with impunity, and he is deeply considering it. The duality coming once again to the forefront. As for Caliban, the blind girl tricks him into going a cell to retrieve a book and locks him inside. This is a pretty nasty thing. She goes in with her mother and father, and it's almost as if her disability tries to make her kind, and we're a bit thrown for a loop when that happens, and Caliban once again is imprisoned. Lily bites off Dorian's ear and wants to see his secrets, and we do. Seems like Lily is building something. A formation, a team. Dorian Gray, Caliban, Lily. The 3 of them, immortal, can't die. Interesting. Vanessa, of course, goes to save Sir Malcolm alone first, of course, as her stubbornness won't allow her to wait. The Dracula reference of Welcome to My Home, Miss Ives is immediately presented by Evil and Poole, and Vanessa descends, and possibly gets to meet her master. Most interestingly enough, at the end of the episode, Sembeni and Ethan are locked in a staircase, trying to get in, trying to save Vanessa. The moon starts to come up. Ethan wants to commit suicide because he doesn't want to kill anyone. Sembeni stops him. And then, when the moon is full, Ethan turns, goes after Sembeni, and tears his throat out. Saving Ethan from suicide, and yet his reward is death. So a couple things we're going to comment on. One, we were right. Lawrence Talbot, Ethan Chandler, his real name is Ethan Lawrence Talbot. How they got Universal to give that up, I'll never know. Or perhaps it's enough of a twinge to avoid copyright infringement. But whatever it is, it's brilliant. It takes us back to the Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein days, but very serious. It's trying to do what very few films and television shows have done and put these classic monsters together. So you have Lawrence Talbot and you have Caliban, which is Frankenstein's creature. You have Victor Frankenstein. You have the Bride of Frankenstein. You have Dorian Gray. And of course, there's only one left from the party. As we stated last week, we know that he is coming, and he is coming with a vengeance. This episode is great. The editing is flawless. The directing is wonderful. The performances are so good. A lot of you are going to be angry about what happened to Simbeni, but we don't really know the full story. There's a little bit more to him than what it seems, so is he really dead? The history of Penny Dreadful would say yes. Someone important dies all the time. We saw it with Proteus, we saw it with Professor Van Helsing, we saw it with Fenton, and many others. So no one is really safe. How, then, do we go forward without Simbeni? How, then, do we go forward without possibly Sir Malcolm? And also, Victor Frankenstein is trapped. Is that all that's going to happen? Evelyn Poole stacked the deck, and yet Hecate is also there. The Lupus Dei has been unleashed. What is going to happen? We're going to find out next week on our season finale of Penny Dreadful, 10 p.m. Sunday showtime. The title of episode 10, the season finale, is And They Were Enemies. That could be referring to Dracula, that could be referring to Caliban, it could be referring to Vanessa, it could be referring to all of the above. I can't wait. So we've been having a lot of fun with predictions and theories, and that's something we generally stay away from, but Penny Dreadful's getting too good not to comment on it. So we're actually 1.5 out of 2. We were right about Lawrence Talbot, we were half right about Dracula and the devil being the same, but we were also half wrong in that Dracula and the devil are also brothers. And if you've listened to the entire reading of the Verbus Diablo, you know exactly what we're talking about. So here are some questions and theories from the season finale and beyond. The most important question is, who's gonna die? I have some odds here. Not included are the owners of the Wax Museum, who have seemingly all signed their death warrants. Cruelty is not a good indicator of life, especially in Victorian literature. So, from last to first, I put a 0% on Ethan and Vanessa, just for plain logic. There's no way that Josh Hartnett and Eva Green aren't going to return for another season of Penny Dreadful. There's too much money, there's too much marketing, and that'd be just a waste of time. There's also a very low chance of Dorian Gray dying, 5%, although he was taken almost completely out of the plot and I really don't see him as relevant. They are trying to somewhat bring him back into the fold with Lily, so I believe he will have a part in the thread and the narrative of Season 3. I also think there's a very low chance, 10%, of Caliban dying. Caliban is an immortal. He seems to be the real indicator of goodness on the show. If there's ever really a character who acts out of pure goodness or pure motivations, it seems to be Caliban. Even the killing of Van Helsing and Proteus was for a purpose. He was lonely, and on some level we can all understand that. Lily, although she has a chance to die, it is a very small chance. I put that at about 20%. Because of Billie Piper 1, the star power, and the story continuing on, and the evolvement of the story, there's a lot she can do with Victor Frankenstein, with Dorian, with Caliban, and with the world in general. She can also twist into the Lucifer plotline. Also, another character that I think has a low chance of dying is the Inspector at 25%. You guys might consider that a little bit low, but Ethan has to have a balance. There has to be some sort of human balance with all this supernatural stuff that's going on. Dr. Van Helsing was one of those forces. Mr. Lyle is back and forth. The Inspector, I think, is actually pretty safe to come back. The ones next, however, have a fairly good chance of dying, and I consider 30% a very good chance for Sir Malcolm. Sir Malcolm is interesting. He doesn't have a lot to live for, really. It's somewhat likely that we could see him die, but it's not outrageous at 30%. The same with Victor Frankenstein, although I consider him a little higher. If you recall in Mary Shelley's tale Frankenstein, that Victor Frankenstein does indeed kick the bucket. So now would be a very interesting time to see him kick the bucket, and it also would affect Caliban very deeply if he did kick the bucket, thus putting Caliban in a bit of a crossroads. What does he do? How does he deal with the loss of his father? Things of that nature. Mr. Lyle and Hecate, I give them both 40%. Although there is a spoilerish scene with Mr. Lyle and Ethan which has already been released, that, of course, probably is not the end of the episode. The reason why I'm saying that is Mr. Lyle has had at least some dealings with evil, specifically Lucifer, and everyone has to pay their price. The same can be said with Hecate. Hecate is fighting multiple entities. She's fighting the failure of possibly Evil and Pool. She's fighting the failure of Lucifer. She's got Vanessa against her. She has possibly Ethan against her. There's a lot going on. And the biggest, of course, is Evil and Pool herself. There's a 50-50 shot. She is just so evil and so dark and so twisted that it's a 50-50 shot. Live or die. She's the one who I believe is in the most danger of kicking the bucket. Please, folks, I don't know why this would be the case, but if you haven't seen Penny Dreadful, catch up, and catch up quickly and immediately. Do it in 1080p, and do it as quickly as possible. You won't go wrong. And now it's time for the media review portion of our show, or as Professor Van Helsing calls it,
the ghastly paraphernalia of our beneficial trade.
I just felt a chill of awesome come in the room right after that line. Never gets old. Well, the man is back. John Johnson is back for part 6 of our 8-part history into the Universal Monsters franchise, our trip into yesteryear. We begin with the Wolfman and we continue on with Phantom of the Opera 1943, and we're getting into that right now.
In 1941, Universal was struggling to find another successful tentpole. They've had all these huge successful films. You had Dracula, you had Phantom of the Opera, you had The Mummy, you had The Invisible Man, you had Bride of Frankenstein. And they're starting to decline just a little bit.
Yeah.
George Wagner took on another famous character in 1941.
Yes, the Wolfman. The story of Lawrence Talbot as portrayed by Lon Chaney Jr. This would have really been a project that would have been up his father's alley, really and truly, with the makeup and everything else. 100% yak hair used in all of that, which is a very popular thing in Santa beards and other things. And I think it was a wonderful story. It really was. Beware of the moon. Bela's back. Claude Rains is back. These movies became a reunion in some ways with these types of actors.
And it's just a killer script.
It is. It's a wonderful script. And this newer version has nothing on the original.
I actually enjoyed the later version with Anthony Hopkins and Benicio del Toro. But, again, Universal, it wasn't the standard that you set back in the day.
No.
The standard that was set in 1941 was perhaps a character even more tragic than the Frankenstein's creature.
Oh, yeah.
Someone who can't love, someone who's bitten by accident for doing a good deed. He was simply trying to help someone. Claude Rains, again. Claude Rains is another one of these actors who is often forgotten by horror fans, but this guy was Dr. Griffin in The Invisible Man. He was Sir John in The Wolfman, and later on he would do a wonderful performance as Eric, spoiler, in the 43 version of Phantom of the Opera.
Yes.
But I love this film. And fortunately, you can see it on Blu-ray. This is another one that you get in that wonderful pack of the Essential Monsters collection. And if you haven't seen it in 1080p, do it. The restoration isn't as good as, say, Dracula 31 or Phantom of the Opera 43, but it's still solid. Do you like this film?
I love this film. It's a very good film.
Gut reaction, why?
Gut reaction, why? The story. It's a gripping story. Like you said, it's a great script. It's atmospheric. You've got Evelyn Akers in there with her famous screams. I mean...
Another Sherlock Holmes veteran, I see.
Yes.
It's a theme, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Well, you're getting into that time period where everybody's coming together for that series. So, but yes, And it's a typical thing with Universal. They reuse sets, they reuse music, they reuse actors, and all these different things, and it's it's good. It's a good take.
Even though the box office is slowing down, and even though sometimes this is considered a B production, I absolutely once again give the Dracula podcast seal of approval. We touched on this just a little bit, but 2 years later, Universal wanted to bring the Phantom of the Opera back into the public venue.
Yes.
And actually, remakes aren't a new thing. Universal, perhaps, did it first, remaking their own property. In 1943, directed by Arthur Lubin, The Phantom of the Opera, starring Claude Rains. Talk about this film. It's different.
It is very different. Number one, there's sound. Color. It's in full color. And the performances are again fantastic. Claude Rains, I thought, did a wonderful job. He wasn't Lon Chaney. I know that at the time people were throwing up the name Lon Chaney beside of Claude Rains, and they were cutting on the film because of the fact that Lon Chaney had done such a great job in the original. And I wonder if Universal was a bit premature in doing it, because it wasn't all that long before Lon Chaney, or after Lon Chaney had done it.
It was less than 20 years.
Yeah.
And audiences had very long memories because we weren't as interconnected as we are today. There wasn't as much to consume. We're in wartime also.
Right.
We're looking for more distractions. I like this film because it's different. I don't generally like musicals, but I love the film's sounds in this. The voice of Susanna Foster and Nelson Eddy, they absolutely resonate. These dark, tragic pictures are painted so well. And it's a different film. It's not necessarily a horror film, but what it is a very sad love story.
Well, the studio had the rights already, so why not do it? Huh?
Indeed.
Yeah.
And this is another good film, another thumbs up.
Yes.
Another film that you can consume on the Universal Essentials Blu-ray. Another one. More value. In fact, for a Blu-ray set, this Universal pack is perhaps the best value you can get, period, when it comes to consuming film. It has a small book inside of it. It has 9 different films, and they're all restored with complete care.
We hope you've enjoyed part 6 of our 8-part trip into yesteryear and criticisms and analysis of the Universal Monsters franchise. Next week, we crack Son of Dracula, Lon Chaney Jr.'s first and only appearance as Count Dracula, as well as The House of Frankenstein, one of the very first films to do what Penny Dreadful is doing so well, in combining vampires and monsters and werewolves. Do they do it as well as Penny Dreadful? Well, you'll find out next week. And folks, most importantly, thank you all for joining in. Thank you to everyone who's listened. Thank you all for the positive comments and responses. This is why we do what we do. We do it for you. We do it for the love of literature. We do it because we love Dracula. We do it because we love things like kindness and friendship and hope. And that's really what Stoker's work is about, beside all the darkness, the light that shines through. And I hope that light is shining through in your lives as well. And from that, ladies and gentlemen, from us to you and yours, have an excellent day.